you know, I mean, I'm the same person, but I'm also, you know, really different now. But I'm glad in a lot of ways that, like, I wrote it when I was so young, and it was also, I mean, first of all, it was all really fresh for me, but also I feel like I was capable of being really honest and kind of revealing of things that I think I wouldn't necessarily be now. You know, I feel like I'm much more private now or something, or guarded, and I wasn't back then. And so it's a cool kind of time capsule of where I was at that time. But the main thing was, I think, you know, when I finished Tweak, it kind of ends on a note of, like, I think from what I remember is, like, I'm in treatment, and, you know, it kind of like maybe things are going to get better. But I still really didn't know that it was possible to, like, live a full, happy, you know, kind of beautiful life in sobriety, because I just hadn't had that experience yet. And I always thought that getting sober was gonna mean having to live this kind of, like, second tier kind of consolation prize life, where I was always gonna be not doing the thing that I really wanted to be doing. And, you know, 15 years later, whatever, I can say that that's not the case at all. Like, I love my life today. I love being sober. I feel like being sober, it almost makes me feel like I'm, like, on the winning team or something, because I have, like, this community of, you know, friends around me, and these tools that I've been given, you know, through the 12-step program and through, you know, therapy and psychiatry and all the stuff I've done, that I can apply, you know, not just in terms of, like, staying off of drugs and staying sober, but in terms of kind of all areas of my life. And, you know, the fact that I can kind of wake up in the morning and feel real, like, joy just to, like, be alive, and it's not about any of the kind of external things in my life, like having the movie made about the books or any of that stuff. Like, that stuff is weird and stressful and stuff. Like, what really makes me happy is just these little things, like going for a walk with my dog, or watching a movie with my wife or something, or I have a son that was born 3 months ago, and you know, being able to spend time with him, like, and to be present for that, you know, is such a gift. And I just never thought it was possible. And the cool thing, I'll stop talking after this, but the cool thing is, you know, I've traveled around the country. Literally, I've been to all 50 states at this point, and I've met people, you know, tens of thousands of people who have exactly the same story that I have, that, you know, that were at the total bottom of, you know, having lost everything, thinking that they could never repair their relationships, thinking that they could never have a real life. And, you know, through doing the work that they were encouraged to do, they've been able to put the pieces of their lives back together and build these really beautiful lives for themselves. So it's a really cool thing to be able to share, is that, you know, we can build our lives back and have lives that are even more beautiful than we ever could have imagined.
That's very nice. I wanted to ask, because I watched an interview that you gave with Timothy Chalamet, like, a couple years back when the movie came out, where you were saying that, like, you know, obviously recovery is a very big part of your life, but you're saying, like, I'm doing other things now. So I guess I was wondering, how do you sort of view recovery? Because I guess on the one hand, it's like a lifelong, like, project, but also how does that change over the years, especially as you accumulate years being sober?
Yeah, that's interesting. That's an interesting question. I mean, I definitely like, in order to be okay on a daily basis, like, there are a lot of things, there's a lot of work that I have to do. I mean, not a lot, but there is some work that I have to do in order to be okay. Like, I mean, the way that I look at it is the way that I think it is, which is that I have a disease. You know, it's the disease of addiction, it's the disease of alcoholism. I also have, you know, been diagnosed with bipolar disorder, so, and, you know, depression, whatever, so I have psychiatric disorders. So there's things I need to do on a daily basis to, like, make sure that I'm okay. Like, I have to take my medication, I have to, you know, talk to my psychiatrist twice a month now. I go to 12-step meetings, I do the work that they tell you to do in the 12-step meetings. So, you know, there is this stuff that I have to do in order to like be okay every day. The cool thing, again, to be able to share is that like the work does work. You know, when I do the work, like my life gets better. I'm able to, you know, have a really full life, like I talked about, and enjoy being a dad and being a husband and being a dog dad or whatever that's called. And but yeah, and then in terms of like my work and stuff, you know, I wrote Tweak, and then I wrote a follow-up which was called We All Fall Down, and then yeah, there it is. But then at a certain point I was like, okay, I can't just like keep writing books about being an addict, because I'm just going to run out of things to write about. So I started writing for television, which was really, you know, fun and challenging, because I didn't ever go to like film school. I never finished college or anything, and I did always have this kind of I don't know, I didn't understand exactly how like formal education could really help me, but since I'm talking to a group of college students, I will say that college is awesome, and having to learn how to do this stuff without a formal education is like way harder and takes way longer, because you know, I didn't know what I didn't know, and so I kind of bungled my way through it. But that said, you know, like I'm right now, like I'm writing a movie for whatever, and I'm writing. Okay. I'm writing a movie that is for whatever, Leonardo DiCaprio's production company or whatever, and then working on this series, but they're all kind of connected. Like everything that I'm working on is always kind of connected to something personal, and because recovery is such a part of my life, and even when I'm writing something that is like the Leonardo DiCaprio thing is about like a famous outlaw surfer, but there's still elements of you know, sort of recovery stuff that comes in there, and my own personal experience. So I feel like even when I try to get away from it, it still is, it's such a part of me and a part of my life that it kind of can't help but seep into things that I do, even that aren't like directly recovery related, if that makes sense.
No, it makes sense that everything's like a product of you, so
yeah,
these facets are going to show up in different ways.
And I think like for, you know, writing stuff, it's always like you always try to connect with what you're writing about or I always do, from a personal level, and you know, it is such a part of my life, and now it's, you know, obviously less about like staying sober and staying off the drugs. It's about you know, trying as much as I can to like live a good life and be a good functioning member of society, and also to try to, you know, help other people if I can and work with others, which is what you're doing, which is so amazing, and it's why it's such an honor to be talking here with you. So
Great Sheff. Anyway, okay, so you're talking about like making meaning and sort of connecting with people, and I wanted to ask about your relationship with your dad, because I know, I mean, obviously you worked on the movie together, and your relationship is really strong through line through your books. So I'm just curious if now that you have your own child and you're a father yourself, like, has that sort of informed your own relationship with your dad, specifically just like in the context of everything that you've been through together?
Yeah, that's interesting. You know, I feel like a lot of people don't know this necessarily, but after I got out of my last treatment center, I went for about a year without talking to my dad or anyone in my family, because I was so, I'd relapsed so many times, and I had sort of built my relationship back with my dad and my stepmom and my little brother and sister especially, and I would sort of build the relationship back with them, and then I would relapse, and it just felt like I was, you know, it was so hard for them. I mean, that's an understatement. It was so brutal for them. And so getting out of treatment the last time, I wanted to make sure that I could like really stay sober before sort of rebuilding that relationship. So I went like a whole year without talking to them. And during that time, that was when I finished writing Tweak. And I finally, you know, got it done, and it was going to be published. And so that was when I reached out to my dad, first like through I guess, like email and then text messages, and we talked on the phone, whatever. And so when I talked to him, I said, you know, I've been sober for a year, you know, if you're open to it, like, I'd love to start, you know, trying to, like, rebuild a relationship or whatever. And that book I was working on, like, I finished it, and it's gonna be published. And my dad said, oh, that's interesting, because I also wrote a book that was about our experience, and it's going to be published. And so we had this kind of very weird opportunity that was, you know, crazy, was we were able to, like, send each other our books and read them. And for me, reading my dad's book, you know, I really got to see the way that my actions affected the people that loved me in a way that was, you know, very profound. And, you know, I always sort of had this idea, like, all right, my dad, when I was, I was like 8 or 9 or something, he got remarried, and then he had my little brother and sister. So we had this, like, other family. So I always thought my dad was going to be able to be like, okay, I have one son who's like a dud, but I'm just going to, like, forget about him and just focus on this, like, good family that I have. But reading my dad's book, I could see that, you know, that was not possible for him. Like, when I was in my active addiction, he was just constantly, you know, full of anxiety about where I was, and his marriage almost broke apart because of my addiction and because of how he wasn't able to be there for his wife and kids because of me. And so reading that really changed things for me, I will say. And what my dad talks about is when he read Tweak, he had this idea that when I was, like, relapsing, which, as I said, I did a lot, that I was kind of just, like, wanting to go have fun and party and, like, go have a good time or whatever, and that I was just kind of giving my middle finger or whatever to everyone that cared about me. And what he says is when he read Tweak, he got to see that when I was relapsing, it wasn't that I was, like, having fun or partying. It was like I was in a ton of pain, and the drugs and alcohol were the only thing that had ever taken that pain away from me. And so I would reach out to them to try to feel better, and then as soon as I did, this invisible switch would get flipped, and I just couldn't stop. And when I was in my active using, it wasn't fun. It was like one horrific thing after another. And so he says, you know, reading Tweak really helped him to forgive me and to understand, you know, what my disease was. And then when the books came out, we had the opportunity to, like, travel around the country together and talk about these things in a way that was really hard, but also kind of amazing. And it helped us to kind of get through, I think, some of the resentments that were still there. And, you know, it's amazing how much, you know, I think talking about things and really, like, facing them does help to sort of heal them. And, you know, at this point, you know, I don't know, like, my dad and I are so close. He is, I mean, literally is like one of my best friends. I talk to him every day. And, you know, I think, I don't know when, there was definitely a certain point where I know that he stopped worrying about me, and I don't know when that was exactly, but I can feel it now. That, I mean, it's been a long time, but I can feel it. That's like, it's just, that anxiety that he always had around me and whether I was going to be okay, he doesn't have that anymore, and I can feel that from him, and it is such a relief because it just lets us just, you know, be able to be, you know, father and son and friends and everything without that added fear that was always there for him. And he's been a great grandfather so far, so that's been really fun to be able to see him in that role.
Oh, that's really interesting, just because, I mean, you can tell in the movie and then just in the book too, like, for all the tension that existed in the relationship, like, it was always underpinned with just, like, such devotion and love, and that's kind of where the despair was coming from. So this kind of segues into something else I wanted to ask about the movie. So the last scene, I was like, I hadn't watched the movie until last Thursday when we did the screening, because I was nervous, and I was right to be nervous because it was a beautiful movie that very much impacted me. But so the final scene, it's your character and your dad's character, and you're sitting on these, like, lawn chairs in front of this big wall, and you're kind of, like, dwarfed by it. And I think your character had just gotten out of the hospital after an overdose, and just like crying, kind of just like curled in on himself, and then he turns to Steve Carell's character and like just gets like enveloped, like he's a little child just being held, and like the despair and like the exhaustion is just like so palpable. And I wanted to know like why that was the note that you chose to end the movie on, because I felt like it was really powerful because it's like realistic. It's not like a happy spin where you're like, and everything was okay at the end. It's like showing the sort of the pain of it. But what was the process?
Well, I think it is hard to, I mean, one of the things that was hard about adapting our stories into the movie, and I think it's the thing that makes it hard to tell sort of addiction stories actually, is that they are very repetitive in a way, or they can be in a way that's not very cinematic, because you know, a normal like movie is, you know, you have the 3 acts or whatever, and you know, there's this triumphant moment at the end. But the thing about addiction is that you know, so often relapse is a part of recovery, and you know, I mean, there were so many times in my life where it did seem like I had sort of put my using behind me, and I was doing better, and I was working, and you know, going to meetings and stuff, and then I would end up relapsing again, and it was so devastating for everyone around me, and confounding, and a lot of times I feel like I would even be surprised by it. Like, I'd find myself having relapse and be like, not even know exactly how I got there. And so, you know, it was hard, I think, when we were trying to tell the story, because there were so many times where it was like, okay, there's a triumphant moment where things are better, but then for whatever reason, you know, I would relapse again. And I sort of described it as like, I always felt like I was like on fire, and the drugs and alcohol were the only thing that had ever put that fire out. And so when that fire would come back on me again, I would reach out to the drugs and alcohol to try to feel better. And it really is like this invisible switch would get flipped, and I just couldn't stop once I started, no matter what. And I tried so many different things. Like, I tried just smoking weed, and you know, would end up smoking pot, you know, from morning until night, and then eventually it would lead me back to hard drugs again. And the same thing with alcohol. So you know, there was this feeling like this was something that I wasn't sure I was ever going to be able to get past, and also know, you know, in some ways how lucky I am too, because we were talking about this before, but you know, when the way that I was using drugs at the time, I wouldn't be able to do that now because of fentanyl and how dangerous it is. And you know, the fact that you know, people that think they're just using cocaine or just using crystal meth or even just taking study drugs like Adderall or whatever will end up having fentanyl in the drugs, and they'll overdose and die. And I've had so many people close to me. I've lost so many people close to me in the 12-step program, especially in the last 5 years because of that. So it felt like to end the movie on a note of like, this is behind me, or this is behind these characters forever, and they're all going to live happily ever after, just wouldn't be truthful or fair to the people that were still struggling. You know, and I do know that as long as it's been for me, I do hear stories all the time of people who've been sober for, you know, 20 years or something, and you know, they'll decide to try drinking again, and you know, will end up you know, either having to end up losing everything and ending up back in treatment, or end up losing their lives. So you know, that's the scary thing about addiction, is it's a chronic illness. It gets worse. It doesn't ever get better. And it is something that, you know, as someone who has this disease, I have to be hyper-vigilant about. And so that was, I don't know, something we were trying to like convey in the movie without it being like too horribly depressing, but also not sort of falsely optimistic or whatever.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, based on like sort of the timeline of when that the movie ended, like I did relapse a number of times after that. So so that was also just being truthful to my story.
Mm-hmm. That's like the idea of the process of like relapsing all that. I think that's why I really liked We All Fall Down so much too. I mean, I was rereading it the other day, and like it's after you've sort of stopped using all the hard drugs, but you're still drinking, you're still smoking a lot of pot, and there's like the like relationship addictions too. So it's sort of, I just was really struck by that. It's like the idea that this sort of behavior can transfer to other things, and it does take all that work over time.
That's an interesting point. Yeah, I think the relationship addiction stuff is, I mean, anything for me, I always felt like I really hated myself, you know, and felt, you know, I just felt really bad about myself. And so anything that could make me, that I thought would make me not feel that way was something that I was gonna like reach out to and try to grab hold of, because I didn't want to sit with who I was, who I am. And so, yeah, whether that was, you know, for me, yeah, like other drugs, obviously alcohol, but also relationships were a huge thing that I sort of looked to try to give me a sense of feeling okay about myself. And that was something, you know, I really had to work through sort of alongside the substance abuse stuff.
I wanted to ask you, because I mean, you're talking about like the process of this all, and do you feel like there's ever this pressure to kind of, I mean, I don't quite know how to phrase it, but like the idea of like the prodigal son kind of keeps coming back into my mind, like you have to tie it up in a way that's like digestible and understandable for people, and sort of act like, oh, this is all behind me, and like just be very sort of clear publicly in a way that maybe personally is not like quite as like clear cut as it might feel. I don't know.
No, that's a good question.
Okay.
That's really interesting. It's an interesting question. I think genuinely I don't feel that way, but it's a good question. I think like I obviously still have a lot of problems in my life. Like, of course, like I get worried about stuff, and you know, life stuff, or my wife and I get in a fight or whatever, you know. But in terms of like that feeling of like self-hatred and the feeling of, yeah, like just being so uncomfortable in my own skin, I feel like that has pretty much is not there anymore. Like I do feel like, you know, as bad as any like external thing gets around me, like I'm being worried about, you know, whatever, like there was the writer's strike I was talking about, like, you know, last year, and you know, Hollywood right now is kind of like in a gnarly place, and whatever. There's like things, external things that could be scary, and yeah, and I can get in a bad fight with my significant other or whatever. But in terms of like the feelings inside of me, like I feel like that work that I've done in the 12-step program, being in therapy, being on the right medication, blah, 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 like I feel pretty like content with who I am now. And I like literally never thought I would be able to say that honestly ever. So it is like kind of a miracle, but it's not a miracle because, you know, it's just from doing the work that was suggested of me. And that's the really cool thing